Welcome to Play Their Way, where we talk about all things in child first coaching. I'm your host, Laura Jane Jones, and today I'm excited to welcome our special guest, Ali Oliver. Welcome, Ali. Great to have you with us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to chat today. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I have to say, this does feel like a VIP episode because Ali Oliver is a big dog, the chief executive of the Youth Sports Trust. Ali is a driving force behind Play Their Way, a former PE teacher, head of PE, and deputy director of sport at the University of Bath. Ali has also been awarded an MBE for her work in this space. So Ali, 20 years with the Youth Sports Trust, 10 in the big chair as CEO. Please, for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with it, tell us a bit more about the organisation.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity. You make me sound very old and a lot grander than I am, but thanks for your kind words. So, the Youth Sport Trust is, in essence, it's a children's charity committed to harnessing the positive power of play and sport for every child to build brighter futures. That's what we exist to do. It's been our mission since day one in 1995, and we just remain consistent on that mission. I mean, obviously, over the years, children's interests, the context in which they're growing up, we've obviously had the global pandemic, changes in the education system, things in children's lives are constantly changing, and that means that the charities had to be continually agile. But really, we try to operate across three levels. Number one, influence and advocacy, both, I guess, upwards into government, but also outwards towards particularly school leaders and system leaders and indeed family leaders, continue trying to raise awareness of the positive value and power of physical activity, play, sport, physical education. We'll probably have a debate about all of these terms, but fundamentally about children moving. And when children move, and particularly when they move together, we all know, I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast is a firm believer of the power of that movement, because we've seen its impact. We know that it does change young people's lives, but what often gets missed in our influencing work is people we are trying to influence, and those who we desperately want to influence the most have had negative experiences, right? And that we're going to talk a lot about that, I'm sure. But those experiences are very real. They are absolutely correct. Poor quality coaching and teaching, which isn't child first, can destroy someone's relationship with movement for life. So influence and advocacy, innovation and development. So we're an organisation that really tries to stay ahead of the wave, really, in how the trends affecting children's lives move all the time. So whether it was, I guess, when I first arrived, the trend was children weren't enjoying physical education, particularly in sport in school. So it was a pure enjoyment issue. That evolved probably 10 years into my time at the Youth Sport Trust. Childhood obesity was a huge topic, and the topic around children and young people's health and well-being. And then more recently, of course, not just mental health issues, but just emotional well-being and perspective on life and life satisfaction is a real issue. So we try to innovate our products and services for our beneficiaries, whether they're education institutions or onto young people. And then finally, implementation. We're lucky enough to have a relatively small but UK-wide development and delivery team. So we can put things on the ground. For example, we deliver the school games national program, a DCMS program designed to try and give every child the right and opportunity to play sport. And we work alongside other partners like active partnerships, national governing bodies of sport to implement that. Or we are implementing work at the moment on behalf of the FA to give every girl equal access to play football, the national game, in education. So those are the three things we do: influence, innovation, and implement. And then finally, just to say that nothing we do we can ever achieve on our own. So we have a set of values like most organisations, but collaboration is really front and centre, and particularly our partners in collaboration in education, early years, primary, secondary, special, alternative education. That's where the real work happens. We're a B2B charity. We work with that system to try and build both inspiration and capability and capacity to make sure those positive outcomes for children and brighter futures are built.
Ali, one thing I want to pick up on there is the
Mm,
change in trends that you kind of talked about in terms of the priorities of the charity since its inception to where we are
mm.
today. And initially it was that enjoyment of physical education, and then childhood obesity, which we know continues to be an issue, and now mental health issues of children. How much does Play Their Way at last feel like a concept, a creation that might address all of these things?
Well, it's such a good point because although I talked about the outcomes, I suppose, that we've been working towards, enjoyment, um, improved physical activity levels and energy balance and things like that, it, whether young people have fun and have a positive, enjoyable, engaging experience underpins everything. So we can't do anything about childhood obesity unless that's there. We can't do anything about mental health unless that's there. So I think while it sounds like perhaps when I described it there, we've gone away from children's enjoyment, we haven't. It's just what at a public consciousness level is the outcome has become much stronger in terms of when we were trying to ensure that children enjoyed physical activity and sport. Really, they were probably enjoying other things, and the issue was why don't they enjoy physical activity and sport as much? Whereas today, the world sadly isn't as enjoyable for too many children, and these other conditions manifest themselves, and those other conditions are so dependent on daily physical activity and movement. So it didn't really matter. I shouldn't say that as the chief executive of the YST, but back in the 90s, it didn't really matter so much if a child didn't enjoy and have a quality experience of PE and sport. It mattered, to those of us that think they should have, but it didn't have the adverse consequence that it has today because children were playing out in the streets, they were still climbing trees, there was no digital engagement. This was pre, handheld devices, and even you won't believe it, but even pre the internet when I was teaching, makes me sound like a right dinosaur, but that's what's changed and meant that actually a positive relationship with movement and enjoying early childhood experiences of movement is so important to our global well-being, which then has consequences for our lives and indeed society and the economy.
I read some quotes from an interview you'd done about leadership, and it was basically about the two most important things to you as a leader, and those two things were listening and seeking out feedback. Now, they're incredibly aligned with Play Their Way. Where has your own sports journey to this point given you the perspective that these should be the focus points for coaches now?
Mm, really good question. So, um, I think what I would draw on is uh, the reason why I feel so proud to work for the Youth Sport Trust today, and I'm so committed to it, is because as a former PE teacher, I both look back at my previous practice, um, where I didn't listen to the young people that I was teaching. That wasn't something I was trained to do. It wasn't just wasn't something that was done. It was like we were the teacher. We knew best, and we knew what was right for these children, apparently. And similarly, we were probably, overly obsessed with our own experiences and felt that we didn't need feedback because we'd been trained you know, um, and actually, to some degree, I think teaching physical education in the 90s, early 90s, when I did teach, it was a little bit easier actually. We didn't have to, I mean, we should have listened, but it wasn't so again obvious that we weren't listening because we had fewer children with complex conditions that physical activity could make a difference to. And actually, we had less competition in things for young people's attention. So I suppose all through my career, those, listening all the time, particularly to the people that you work with and the people you work on behalf of, has something that I've learned and nowhere near perfect, but trying to be better, and similarly seeking feedback is something that's obvious to me today in my day-to-day role. But looking back when I was a teacher, I think, why didn't I do these things? Why didn't I just intrinsically do it? And I think one was the culture of teaching, and probably coaching wasn't there. It was a culture of do to rather than do with. And as I say, it probably wasn't as blindingly obvious that something was going wrong because children were still a bit more active and they had fewer choices of things to do. So if you didn't play a musical instrument or do performing arts, you'd probably do some kind of sporting activity. Whereas now, the options are enormous, and the competition for children's engagement is so much higher. And you only have to look at the advertising and marketing industry to know that the way you get cut through is really, really understanding, in their world, the customer, and in our world, the child or the young person.
One thing I think is quite interesting there is you talked about, now I was a child in the 90s. If you were a child who played an
Sorry.
instrument, no, it's
So
fine.
sorry. We probably did some horrible things to you as PE teachers. I do apologise.
But
Um,
you talked about those children who were playing an instrument, or who were doing
mm,
performing arts, and it was the other children who might then be engaged by PE. Do you think
mm,
that there was a real attitude of either or, as opposed to
mm.
all children participating in some level of movement or sport?
Yes, I do, I do. I think that's a really accurate reflection. And of course, it's still important today. We definitely, at the Youth Sport Trust, and I personally wouldn't advocate that every child is an athlete or a sports person. It is that the world has shifted in such a way, and sedentary lifestyles are so much more prominent, that a bit like brushing your teeth every day, it's just something we got to do. If we want to keep our teeth, if we want to keep our health, if we want our mental health and our physical well-being to be maintained, it's just one of those things that you've kind of got to do. But I think I suppose there would be some people in the dental hygiene industry that could say you can make brushing your teeth fun. Um, but I do think in the play and physical activity space, we've got the opportunity to make something a bit more than an obligation. We've got the opportunity to make it something that people want to do, and want to come back and do. But absolutely, every child needs to keep moving, and I use the term keep moving really thoughtfully, because I believe, and I think we all know, children are born moving. You only have to ask the mum or dad or the carer of an under two, and the biggest challenge is how do you contain them and stop them wriggling and moving and running around. We have to kind of harness those instincts and innate reflexes, really, and not try and engineer them out of children. But then, secondly, how we help young people find their love of movement, whatever that happens to be, from Pilates to table tennis to mountaineering, whatever it happens to be. We have to help young people find that, because in today's world, if we don't move, we suffer the consequences. And probably a wider conversation, which you may or may not want to go there. Um, I don't think that argument is understood or recognized enough, that both what a child does under 5 not only impacts on their relationship with movement for life, but it impacts on their brain development. It impacts on how they socialize, how they connect with other humans, all of those sorts of things. And I just don't think, we're continuing to chip away at the Youth Sport Trust at that. But I'm hopeful that we will get to that point where no parent, carer, no school leader, no politician with responsibility for children and young people's education would even dream of not having daily movement as a fundamental foundation on which successful childhood happens and happy and healthy lives are built. So, completely agree that when movement was more part of our natural lives, um, it wasn't as important, the movement bit. And I think that's one of the things that we all face, and why play their way is so important, that we've kind of got this moral imperative to help children develop normally, healthily, successfully. And therefore, you could make it like brushing your teeth. It's just a routine you've got to do every day, and even if you hate it, and we've got the opportunity to make it enjoyable. And part of the benefit, I suppose, particularly around mental health, is when you enjoy it. You do get some benefits just from moving, whether you like it or not. Just chemical changes happen which make your mood lighter, etc. But you double, triple, multiply the benefits when people enjoy doing it, and they're more likely to do it more, and therefore it's that multiplier effect. Everything, what's my hashtag? When we play, life gets better, and the more we play, the better it gets.
One thing that you've talked on there is the foundation of movement, and that's something I've been very interested in whilst we've been making this Play Their Way podcast. I
Mm,
read recently about the amount of children who are struggling with crossing the midpoint, that right
mm,
hand, left knee, left hand, right knee, and how that
mm,
actually has a longer term effect on their ability to learn to read.
mm.
Is the key battleground, for want of a better term, for the Youth Sport Trust at the moment, the digitisation of society? Is that's what's making children more sedentary, do you think?
It is a big battleground. So in our strategy that we launched in 2022 and runs to 2035 in line with our Class of 2035 work, which we actually kicked off in 2015 when we were 20 years old, and we'll be 40 years old when we get to 2035. Part of that strategy has three objectives. Um, One of which is urgent action, which was all about, bearing in mind this was launched in 2022, so it was written in 2021, building back healthier, happier, more resilient children. And the building back nods absolutely to the pandemic and what I call long lockdown, not just long COVID, but long lockdown for children and young people. And within that, leveling the playing field for the most disadvantaged, because we know that the gaps in children's well-being were magnified during that period because of access and opportunity. One of them is about societal change, which is the long-term one, which we hope will be more of our work, and less urgent action as we get closer to 2035, which is about changing perceptions and attitudes to the importance of physical literacy and physical development in children's education and growth. But the middle one, which is the one you refer to, is called generational shift. And that runs with equal emphasis throughout the 13 years of the strategy. And that is all about um, effectively balancing the demands of the digital age through the human connection of play and sport. And I think the reason it runs all the way through, to your point, is because that is a key battleground. And we know it would be ill-advised to try and say we want to stop children being engaged in technology and digital. It is the world. It's the world we live in, and we all need to find a way of balancing that engagement. Um, but I think the digital bit has all sorts of other consequences, which compound mental health, not just the sedentary behaviour associated with it, the things young people see, the distortion of social and human relationships, all of those sorts of things add layers onto why we need to get the balance back. And 5 and 6 hours on a screen is not normal and doesn't allow enough hours in the day to balance. You can't do 6 hours of that and 6 hours of play and physical activity. There just aren't enough hours in the day. So we do have to, harness, bring that back a bit, and at the same time increase the amount of time young people are active. But um, there are all sorts of other battlegrounds, and one of them I would want to flag today while we're talking about this is how much time children spend sitting during a school day. Um, all of the evidence, I'm no neuroscientist, but I've listened to enough of them and I've read enough books on this to know that isn't the best way to learn. So if we want young people to maintain their attentional focus, their working memory, and all of those sorts of things, we just need to punctuate the day with moving. And I think, again, actually not just in the 90s when I was teaching, but let's go right back to the 70s when I was a child. That was the balance, actually. Little Ali would have run around for 20 hours a day if you'd let me. And I needed to sit down and focus and do some other things that were essential in life. But today, when we leave school and we see too many children not moving at all, we've got 2.2 million children do less than 30 minutes of movement, moderate to vigorous physical activity a day. I mean, that just school has to be an environment. If a school is about more than just passing tests and passing exams, if it's a place where we prepare for the life ahead and being successful adults, then we have to do something about the amount of movement in the school day. But again, just shifting again to early years. I listened to one of our athlete mentors is a brilliant woman called Rachel Mackenzie, who's also a neurophysio. So while she does some athlete mentoring for us as a former Thai boxing world champion, don't get on the wrong side of her, by the way, as a neurophysio, she did a brilliant session for us with a group of school leaders not so long ago, talking about the development of our effectively the inner ear and the vestibular system. And when children are young, they're supposed to roll around, turn upside down, spin in circles, and all of that movement develops an appropriate vestibular system to give us balance, right? So you're talking about moving across the midline of the body. This is another example where children, the best way to exemplify this, although it's not strictly true, is imagine as adults we spent our entire time mildly drunk, and therefore we couldn't see straight, we couldn't track things because we're dizzy all the time. We would probably be slightly short fused. We have more irrational arguments when we're drunk, and actually we find moving really, really hard because we can't coordinate, can't catch a ball because we can't kind of focus on it. So look, listen, there's another sort of vicious cycle, is if children don't move enough when they're young, that has an impact on parts of their human physiology that don't develop properly, that impacts upon their brain, which then impacts upon their learning, but it also impacts on how they're going to enjoy physical activity and sport later on in life, because they won't have that basic competence to be able to do it. So long answer to a short question, but I'm so excited about these revelations becoming common knowledge. And again, while it's not exactly the same principle, I lost my mum in 2021 through Alzheimer's disease and a form of dementia. And we've got there in the medical profession. That I remember the day we sat down with the doctors after my mum had had a kind of brain scan and assessment, and they told us that's what she'd got. And we were all sitting around going, well, what do we do? Is it crosswords? Is it puzzles? What do we do for mum? And the clinician said, no, just get her walking every day. Keep her walking, keep her moving. That's what will maintain as much health as you can in her brain and the synapses and the neural pathways and the grey matter. So we kind of get that there's this relationship between movement and brain function in the elderly when we're deteriorating, but I don't think we've got to that tipping point yet in public awareness and knowledge. In children, and hence why in our strategy I said urgent action, societal change and generational shift. The societal change, we hope by 2035 this will be better understood, and again come back to no parent, head teacher, politician, anyone with responsibility for children wouldn't absolutely prioritize making sure their day is active, but then ensuring those who have responsibility for that active time, ensuring that it's relevant, meaningful, inclusive, fun and engaging.
The F word is a bad word, or at least that's how it feels like it's become societally. And the F word I'm talking about is fun. Fun is connected to movement for so many people. And unfortunately, when you've talked about children sitting in classrooms, it does feel like if we give children the ability to move around and have active bodies and promote fun, we're taking them off task. How much do we need to start to change this culture that movement is the enemy of education, for example, or learning? Even in a sports environment, I see so many coaching sessions where children begin sat crisscross applesauce, as the Americans call it, being told what they're going to do for the next hour. And that might be the first 5-10 minutes in some instances. How much more beneficial would it be if they're moving whilst they're being told what's coming up?
Well, it's a balance. It's all a balance, I think. So in physical education, for example, one of the things that we feel quite strongly about is all of this focus on young people can articulate what they can do and the tactics and techniques of sport. It's like that forces the education into a kind of a knowledge-based approach and a way of assessing young people in physical education by what they can articulate. And that just misses the point completely, that we want them to demonstrate it by doing and learn it by doing, not learn it by sitting down and then evidence it by repeating back in a sedentary state. So I think that's got to be something that we try and recalibrate, really. And at the moment, there's a curriculum and assessment review ongoing in England, as many listeners to the podcast will know. And we're hoping that this is a great opportunity to revisit the physical education curriculum, both from a aims and purpose perspective and from a content perspective, that we sort of um, reduce the complexity of this subject a bit and its need to academically justify itself. It's got value in its own right, and it's also hugely valuable as an access subject to learning elsewhere in the school. So I think that's an important shift that we've got to kind of make and get over. But to come back to I guess your question about the F word, um, as a former PE teacher, I can remember feeling sometimes like a second class citizen in school, because there were the serious subjects and then there was the fun subjects. And when I taught in the 90s, it was only just after the launch of the national curriculum at the end of the 80s. But actually, teaching PE was still a lot of fun. We might have not been as helpful as we could have been to children, but there was less scrutiny around us and less, I guess, accountability for this knowledge and understanding that there is today. But we had the ability to make it fun. We just didn't know that we should have made it fun. Like I do remember working, and certainly a lot of my peers will talk to me about working, they preferred teaching kind of those children who were less inspired and less engaged in sport outside school, because they could make the lessons more fun, and those who were kind of, I guess, more committed to it or had higher levels of ability and wanted to push on, they kind of felt the need to be much more intense about it. But the simple fact is, if we need to be active for life, it has to be enjoyable. And really importantly, in the context of play their way, that enjoyment looks really different to every young person. So being able to listen to young people, come back to their early question, but importantly, hear their voice, and then ensure that in physical education, I believe one of our number one roles is to give them as much choice as possible. And again, I have been sort of challenged on that by physical educators in the past, is if we give children too much choice, too much variety, they don't get any deep learning in anything. And for me, it's get the choice first. When they've found something that they connect with and they enjoy, then you move into the deep learning. But let's not do lots of deep learning in gymnastics or team games or aquatic activities, whatever it happens to be, if it's not something that the young person really connects with. That feels like we're doing it the wrong way around. Let's find what they love as best we can, and then build the confidence and competence and maintain the enjoyment, therefore, of that activity.
We know that children who are participating in lots of different sports will oftentimes become the more accomplished athletes long term. I know on this podcast, people who listen every week will be sick of me talking about the South African cricketer A.B. de Villiers, who has a list as long as my arm of his achievements as a high school athlete. Do you think where we're pigeonholing kids at times, there's this issue that we're treating children as child athletes as opposed to child sports participants, for want of a pithier phrase?
I think in the spirit of child first, there are some children that know what they love very early on, and they want to do it, and they want to be as good as they can be and go as far as they can be. Nothing wrong with that at all, as long as it's their journey and their dream, and we are wrapping ourselves around them and listening to them and responding to those ambitions. If it's our dream imposed on them, and I think that's as acceptable and relevant and appropriate as it is a child who wants to play lots of just loves playing. I mean, if I look back at myself, I ended up specializing a bit more in netball than anything else, but I was never really good at anything. I just loved moving. That's the only thing that I felt confident and competent doing, and it gave me the confidence in lots of other parts of my life as a result. But I think one of the challenges we do have, and it's another thing we're trying to innovate on at the YST, is multi-sport environments. So one of the things that forces children to specialise is the fact there's no choice. Like, if I want to do lots of sports, I've got to have enough parental or carer support to get me in those environments to play lots of activities. Monday night swimming, Tuesday night tennis, Wednesday night football. That just isn't accessible to lots and lots of children. And my generation, I suppose, as being a woman in my mid 50s, grew up at a time when we still had quite a lot of youth provision, and I was a member of a church youth club. Um, and although my parents were fairly religious, it wasn't necessarily that I was there for that element of it. I was just there to be with my mates and have fun. And what did we do? We played table tennis, we played floor hockey, we played. It wasn't volleyball, but we thought we were playing volleyball. We didn't know any of the skills, but we loved just playing a range of things. And we would 20 minutes into the session say, I'm bored of this now, let's play something else. How often have we got um, sporting clubs and environments, either in after school time or out of school time, that allow that sort of choice and freedom and flexibility? So, I think if a child wants to specialize and wants to be a mini, um, whatever, a mini elite sports person, if that's their dream, and we can enable them and support them to be the very best version of themselves in that ambition, vision, great. Uh, Obviously, we should try where possible to be um, responsible adults in not fueling dreams that are clearly going to be unfounded. But still, as a child, you want them to have dreams and you want them to believe anything's possible. So we shouldn't restrict that ambition, but we certainly shouldn't be living out ours. But for other young people, the way to avoid the risks and damage that can come from early specialisation, we need more multi-sport environment. And you'll be very familiar, as will a lot of listeners and probably people that have spoken on this podcast before, the European sport club model, which is a multi-sports club that the whole family belong to and kind of get registered at birth as belonging to. It couldn't be further from our model of sport specific clubs, which can be exclusive because of the cost of getting there, the distance from where young people live, and are very, very sport specific and don't necessarily have the family context to them.
I found what you just said about that church sport group really relatable. I'm a child of the late 90s, early noughties, and I was a Girl Guide.
Yes.
Because for me, that was the one place that I could go for an hour and a half, one weeknight a week, and run around and play football, because there was no provision for girls' football when I was that age. Essentially circuit training we would set up for ourselves in the village hall that we went to. So again, it was children making choices for the movement they want. And you've talked about these European sports clubs, and I work a lot in France on the rugby, and I get to see that. Where should we be pressurizing society to create these spaces? Is it government that needs to do this? Are they an extension of schools? How do we get there? What are we looking for?
Okay, as always, the implementation is much harder than the ideology. So let me start in schools. One of the things, again, through the curriculum review and the lobbying we're doing around some form of strategy for young people and physical activity in sport, whether that's a school sport strategy, whether that's a play strategy, whether it's a youth strategy, there's a lot of options flying around at the moment. The number one thing we could do in education is make enrichment part of the school day instead of a bolt on, and certainly instead of a paid for childcare service at the end of the school day. So that would demand both policy and investment from government to kind of make that a possibility. But I do think there are enormous benefits to making sure the curricula and the co-curricular are valued equally and they are accessible to everybody. And then I think if you could create that, you would have the opportunity to reimagine what extracurricular sport has traditionally been about, and create much more of a multi-sport environment. One of the things that some colleagues at the Youth Sport Trust are working on at the moment is a multi-sport youth club, in the image, interestingly, of uniform youth. So uniform youth, as you've described there from your experience of guides or brownies, is so similar to a sports club. The uniform is a tracksuit or a kit. It's intergenerational. Older adults volunteer to support younger adults, and the younger adults eventually migrate upwards and end up being the leaders themselves. It's a place of informal education. There's reward and recognition. Often, sports clubs have badge structures or some form of reward and recognition. How can we take the learning and the inspiration from uniform youth and kind of make it a bit more overt in a multi-sport kind of youth club environment, and try and bring these two worlds a little bit closer together in terms of ideology. Um, Secondly, I think if I'm no longer sadly part of a sports club, I could give an excuse that my job stops me doing it. It's probably not a valid excuse, but I'll say that at the moment. But in a sports club, if I was in the netball club or the athletics club that I was at one point, I would really seriously be thinking about my minis section or my junior section being multi-sport. And I think if every sport had a kind of an under eights or under tens, whatever, multi-sport section, every sport would benefit. And there's this, and again, I understand it, a tendency if you're running a sport to try and get everybody to play your sport. Like, we want to make our sport the number one choice for girls or the number one choice for boys, but really the enemy is not another sport. The enemy is outside sport. And actually, if we had more multi-sport, mini provision, junior provision, and young people moved more fluidly between the sports clubs, like they might have gone to a netball club but realized, actually, we did football the other night, I really like football, then it's okay and acceptable, because there'll be an equal and opposite flow from girls that are boys that are in a football club that want to play netball. So I think there's something there which doesn't need a policy change. It needs a sporting landscape response to go, are we succeeding? Are we really, who does our system at the moment work for? And it doesn't probably work for children, and it probably doesn't work for the governing bodies either. So what more could we do there? I think your example of the guides is a great one, where we should get out of our sector, and how do we enable uniform youth to embrace more physical activity. And we could do a lot to equip Sea Cadets, Air Cadets, Jewish lads and girls brigade. It could be any of those clubs. We could equip them to be able to help young people to be active and enjoy and form a positive relationship with movement. Again, that wouldn't necessarily need policy. It needs thinking at a strategic level and at a sector level, kind of doing differently. And then the final one, I think, is in the home, is parent education, and how we can help parents get a balanced view of what a healthy youth sport experience looks like. And I think there is still a lot of confusion, a lot of misunderstanding, and either that tendency to say, my kid's going to play for the Premier League one day, or win Wimbledon one day, which is the parent choice, or I'm looking to the school to do that for me. Physical education is a course, foundation subject in the national curriculum. Surely that should be happening there, therefore I wash my hands of it. Or we've got the view, which is, I hated PE in sport, it damaged me beyond belief, and therefore I'm not going to put my child in that environment. And we've got to address all three. We've got to tackle all three issues of parent education, and that again can be done without a political or investment. It can be all of us kind of getting together and saying, we're all going to do our bit to try and help support active parenting in a really good way.
That parents point you've made brings me really neatly onto something I want to speak to you about, and that's the evolution of child coaching, and where play their way sits now as this modern concept of how we're moving forward. It feels a world away from the stick rather than carrot approach that I certainly was brought up with in a secondary school environment of physical education. And the one thing that we know puts so many parents off, and their awful memories of PE, play their way is the antithesis of this, isn't it? It's the complete opposite. How do we get that message out to parents?
If I knew the answer to that, I'd probably be able to pack up and go home, because parents are still the biggest influencer on a child's attitude and experience, and they can often still at primary schools be cited as the number one role model in a child's life and where their attitudes and perceptions are built. So it's not easy. But we know attitudes and perceptions can be changed. We know Sport England's This Girl Can campaign, We Are Undefeatables campaign, London 2012 and how it approached volunteering, how it approached Paralympic sport. These big things require big investment. I'm not suggesting we try and host the Olympic Games every 4 years and have a different theme, but we need something that gets cut through at a national level. Now that might be a campaign. It might be a national campaign to probably both raise awareness of what play and sport can be like. So kind of changing people's attitudes if they've had a negative experience, but probably as importantly, a bit like the anti-smoking campaigns and the clunk click every trip campaign, you have to do a bit of shock, and there's some shock tactics here. Would signpost listeners actually to our Healthy Movers VT. We did a 60-second VT, which sort of reminded, ideally targeting parents and carers, reminding them that children who don't move as much in the early years don't have the same brain development. Like, that's a bit of a shock tactic from lots of people. So I think that's part of it. But also we know that if we have authentic, mission-driven champions, Marcus Rashford, Jamie Oliver, we can harness public interest and engagement and equally influence the politicians at the same time. So I think there's there's a couple of things there, and we at the Youth Sport Trust would love to be able to support either of those two, a national campaign or someone who authentically wants to get out there and do that. And indeed, through Sir Mo Farah as our national school sport champion, we're doing our bit to try and harness his immense followership. He's got an incredible backstory as a young person and the role that physical activity in sport, and importantly his PE teacher Alan Watkinson, played in him becoming the very best version of himself. But and Mo would agree with this, there is a risk when you have a national school sport champion who's a multiple world champion and gold medalist. It gets interpreted that that's what the charity is trying for every child, and clearly we're not. And one of the things that Mo's done really well for us is talk as a dad of a family, and why this is important to his children, not because he wants them to emulate him, but he just wants them to be healthy and happy. But we haven't really had, I suppose Joe Wicks would be the closest during lockdown, did a lot to try and influence people that particularly children during that period needed to be active, and he did an enormous amount to promote that. But sadly, post-pandemic, it's the momentum in that campaign has dropped off as we've all gone back to our normal lives. But I think something like a national campaign or an individual that's on a mission. We just heard, didn't we, Sir Gareth Southgate do his Dimbleby lecture on adolescence. My goodness, that plus the TV programme actually dramatising through television is another great way of landing the message. But we haven't really had, I suppose, Freddie Flintoff did his Field of Dreams, which was a really good one of doing that. But we just haven't got it to the old Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point where it's become mass hysteria and this is what we need to change for young people. We haven't got to that point yet.
We do know at a grassroots level, coaches can change hearts and minds in their own communities, though. So how important is it for those who are coaching through Play Their Way that they are making parents aware of the fact that they're having conversations with the children, that this is about a two-way street nowadays, that coaches are a conduit for children to be future athletes or just future moving adults?
Really important. Really, it's the power of one, isn't it? If we all did that, if the however many thousand coaches of kids there are out there all became ambassadors for Play Their Way and the principles of child first coaching, very quickly people would see that. Parents standing on the sidelines dropping their kids off, collecting them, would see it and hear it. They would probably hear it from their children back at home. But this is probably where again the role of the coach in nurturing and understanding around parents, how they can adopt some of the principles from Play Their Way. We still know, and we know this in schools as well, that still the common question after any form of sporting engagement is, did you win? Not did you enjoy it? Who played the best on the team? Who was the most valuable player on the team? And who picked you up when you did something that you weren't proud of, or that you fell over and you hurt yourself? We never ask those questions. We ask, did you win? It's kind of a default, and very simple, not kind of telling to parents, but just simply highlighting the different impact that the 2 or 3 questions they ask their child about a session can reframe the child's understanding of the value in that experience. It's not just about winning and losing. It's purely, did you have fun? Did you enjoy it? What ideas and suggestions did you put forward? Those sorts of things could make a real difference. So I do believe in the power of one, as well as the big national stuff that I've spoken about. And I'm really pleased that you picked me up on that and drew us back to that point.
Well, Ali, thanks so much for your time today. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you. So it's been a great banter, and you've kind of kept me on my toes and made me think of a load of stuff. I guess until we verbalize it, sometimes we make assumptions that this stuff is out there and known. So it's been a really good reminder for me to make sure I talk more about. I use my power of one more.
Thanks so much, Ali. I've really enjoyed this 45 minutes that we've had together. And thank you for listening wherever you are. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, be sure to leave us a review and share this with someone else who you think might like it too. And follow Play Their Way on social media, at Play Their Way on TikTok, X and LinkedIn, and at Play Their Way UK on Facebook and Instagram. See you soon.